Megyn Kelly calls it toxic compassion. I call it selective compassion or guilt trip compassion. Whatever you call it, it's manipulation. It's a direct appeal to emotion, not logic. It's usually guilt disguised as compassion, and it's ripping us apart. Now, emotion is not bad. Emotion is what motivates you to get out of bed. It's vital. But emotion unguided by rational thought is a shipwreck waiting to happen. Guilt is a powerful emotion. If I can make you feel guilt or shame, I can control you as long as I can circumvent the rational part of your brain. Peddlers of guilt work overtime to do exactly that, to control you through your emotions, through guilt and shame. They're manipulators. This is how they do it. They define what compassion, love, hate, racism, etc. looks like for a given issue, and then when you don't fit their definition, they try to shame you for it. First, they define it, and then they hold you accountable to their definition. That's how they control you. In the culture of feelers, which America is, peddlers of guilt wield immense power. Now, I know many of you feel frustrated by the guilt trip rhetoric we're bombarded with every day because you don't know how to respond. Today, I'm going to talk about how to take back control, starting with 5 simple words. Then I'm going to build from there. This is Brad Bright. Welcome to the God is Issue podcast, where I show how God is the issue in every issue. Why? Because we can trace all our human problems to our view of God. If you find this podcast helpful, please remember to like and subscribe. And when subscribing, don't forget to click on the bell so you'll be notified whenever I post a new podcast. Peddlers of guilt talk about compassion, but they mean selective compassion, also known as favoritism. They talk about love, but they mean tolerance. They talk about racism, but they excuse to own their own hate. They talk about gender, but they refuse to define what a woman is. They say no human is illegal, unless, of course, you're talking about an unborn human, in which case it's okay to forcibly deport that human from the womb. Guilt trip compassion is almost always delivered in a smooth soundbite designed to use your values and your beliefs against you by slyly redefining them. Most of these manipulative soundbites are either a direct or indirect appeal to guilt masquerading as compassion or love. Now, during my college years, the compelling guilt-laced mantra was, live simply so that others can simply live. It sounded great. But in practice, it was an appeal to guilt disguised as an appeal to compassion. The peddlers of guilt use it as a stick to beat you with, not a carrot. In general, that's how you can tell the difference between an appeal to guilt versus an appeal to compassion. Does it feel more like a stick or a carrot? That's one of my biggest objections to the term white privilege. They claim it's descriptive, but they almost always use it as a stick to beat you with to try to guilt trip you. I want to talk about how to respond to guilt-inducing rhetoric by breaking up the response into 3 simple steps. Step 1, take control of the conversation in 5 words. Jesus always took control of the conversation. Step 2, require the other person to define their terms. This allows you to continue to control the conversation. And then step 3, make God the issue so you can have a God conversation. This is what Jesus asks us to do. So let's start with step 1. Take control of the conversation in 5 words. If someone accuses you of white privilege or hating immigrants or being a fascist or racist, whatever, here's how to respond in 5 words. You're entitled to your opinion. You're entitled to your opinion. 5 words. Voila, you're no longer on defense. You've just labeled their implied definition as an opinion, which it is. You just demoted their truth, their self-perceived moral high ground, to mere fallible opinion. What are they supposed to do with that? What can they do with that? However, if you stop there, you have effectively ended the conversation. Yes, you have taken control and shut them down, but to what end? Simply to feel good about yourself or score points? Now, if that's all you really want, then by all means stop there. However, as a follower of Jesus, my primary goal is to win people, not arguments. Therefore, I continue, you're entitled to your opinion. However, if you'd like to have a conversation, I have a couple questions for you. You've still taken control, but you've softened it by inviting them into conversation. However, you want to continue to control the dialogue, which is why you end with, I have a couple questions for you. What I learned in politics is that the person asking the questions controls the outcome. Don't miss that. The person asking the questions controls the outcome. You can use these 5 words as your stock response whenever someone spouts their opinion masquerading as truth. You're entitled to your opinion. Test it. Now then, let's move on to step 2. Require them to define their terms and answer clarifying questions. Too often, folks, we get stuck because we don't ask clarifying questions. And the most basic clarifying question is, what do you mean by X? For instance, if someone says love is love, or love is more powerful than hate, or you should be able to love whomever you want, simply respond, what is love? Then you can ask, what's the difference between love and tolerance? Or what would you say is the highest form of love? Or you can ask, what is hate? If they define hate as intolerance, ask, so if we disagree, does that mean you hate me? Not do I hate you, but do you hate me? In their addled brain, you're the hater. But now you just put it back on them, not by accusing, but by asking. Or what if they say no human is illegal? Well, we'll simply ask, what do you mean when you say no human is illegal? Do you really think drug dealers, human traffickers, and terrorists aren't illegal? Is it okay for me as a human to ignore any laws I don't like? Or what about this one? Trans rights are human rights. We'll simply ask, what are human rights? Can you define them? Where do they come from? How do I know they're even real? Now you get the idea. Ask clarifying questions beginning with, what do you mean by? Folks, you can do this on any issue. Almost any appeal to guilt or to emotion in general begins to fall apart as soon as you require people to define and clarify what they mean. Never discuss any issue until a person first defines what they mean and then ask basic clarifying questions. If you don't, the only thing you're going to create is a spitting match. Is that what you want? Now, once they've defined what they really mean, you can nicely add, I think you made a good point here, but we clearly disagree over here. Do you see what this can do for you? It can open the door for conversation. But it's asking questions that allows you to get to a conversation and to maintain control of the conversation. Now, one more thing. This should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. When they answer your questions, listen to understand, not to attack. Keep in mind that as a follower of Jesus, your goal is generally to win a person, not an argument. Not always, but generally. It's what Jesus called fishing for men. So ask clarifying questions and then listen. If you can do that, it'll set you up for the final step. Step 3, make God the issue. But folks, do it in a natural way. Here's how. After you ask clarifying questions, simply ask a question that connects God to that specific issue, like, how do you think Jesus would define love? How do you think Jesus would define hate? How do you think God defines a woman? Where do you think God would say human rights come from? See, you're setting up God or Jesus as the authority, not you, not them. Why? Because God is the authority. You simply tie the what does God think question back into whatever issue you were already talking about. You're going to get some strange answers, but it doesn't matter because that's not the point. The real point is to set you up for the final question. How would you describe God? Or, in your opinion, who is Jesus? That question allows you to fish for people just like Jesus did. I like to say that evangelism is simply looking for people who are looking for God. It takes all the pressure off. If you view these 3 steps as a fishing pole rather than as a sword, it should allow you to have some great God conversations. So the 3 steps are: 1, you're entitled to your opinion. 2, can you define what you mean by X? And 3, how do you think God feels about X? And then, of course, end with, by the way, how would you describe God? So when I say God is the issue in every issue, it implies that you can make God the issue in every issue, which you can. I hope you found this podcast helpful. If you did, please share it. This is Brad Bright. Thanks for joining me today, and God bless.